The cemetery gates stood open like silent sentinels as Daniel Carter pulled his sedan into the gravel parking lot. Autumn had painted the world in shades of amber and rust, and fallen leaves skittered across the windshield before settling on the hood. He sat there for a moment, engine idling, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white. 7 years. It had been 7 years since he last stood at her grave. 7 years since he'd allowed himself to confront the guilt that had eaten away at him piece by piece. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The headstone was modest, exactly as her family had chosen. Sarah Mitchell, beloved daughter and sister, taken too soon at 26. Daniel knelt on the damp grass, not caring that the moisture seeped through his expensive suit pants. He had dressed well today, as if that somehow mattered, as if Sarah could see him and would care about his designer clothes and polished shoes. The irony wasn't lost on him. When they were together, she had loved him in torn jeans and faded shirts, back when he was nobody, back when he had nothing but dreams and her laughter to sustain him. The words came slowly at first, stumbling out like strangers in his mouth. He told her about the company he'd built, the success that came too late to share with her, the emptiness of achievement without someone to celebrate it with. He confessed the thing that had haunted him through countless sleepless nights, that he had chosen ambition over her, that his last words to her before she died had been harsh and unforgiving during an argument he could barely remember the details of now. Something trivial about his work hours, about missed dinners and broken promises. He had told her she was holding him back, that she didn't understand what it took to succeed. 3 days later, the car accident took her before he could apologize, before he could take back words that now felt like knives in his own chest. Daniel's voice cracked as he spoke, tears he had suppressed for years finally breaking free. He was so absorbed in his confession, so lost in the cascade of regret and sorrow, that he didn't hear the footsteps approaching from behind. It wasn't until a small voice pierced through his grief that he became aware he wasn't alone. The voice was high and uncertain, belonging to a child. Daniel froze, the words dying in his throat. He turned slowly, still kneeling, and found himself staring at two identical faces. Twin boys, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, stood a few feet away holding hands. They had the same sandy brown hair that caught the afternoon light, the same dusting of freckles across their noses, the same wide eyes that studied him with a mixture of curiosity and something else, something that looked unsettlingly like recognition. Daniel rose to his feet, confusion replacing grief. The boys wore matching jackets, though one was navy and the other forest green, as if someone had tried to help people tell them apart. They were alone, no adult hovering nearby, no parent calling them back. The cemetery stretched out around them, quiet except for the rustle of wind through the trees and the distant sound of traffic beyond the iron fence. The boy in the navy jacket took a tentative step forward. His brother remained where he was, thumb creeping toward his mouth before he caught himself and dropped his hand. Daniel looked around, searching for whoever was responsible for these children, but the paths between the graves remained empty. Daniel's mind reeled. The word felt impossible, absurd, yet it hung in the air between them with undeniable weight. His eyes darted from one boy to the other, searching their faces for some explanation, some rational reason why two strange children would call him by that name. That's when he saw it. The shape of their eyes, the curve of their chins, the way the one in the green jacket tilted his head when he was thinking exactly the way Daniel himself did when puzzling through a problem. But it was more than that. As Daniel stared at them, really looked at them, he saw Sarah too. Her smile in their faces, the exact shade of her eyes looking back at him, the same stubborn set to their jaws that she'd had when she was determined about something. It was impossible. It had to be impossible. Sarah had been gone for 7 years, and these boys couldn't be more than 6. The boy in navy stepped closer, close enough that Daniel could have reached out and touched him if he'd dared. The child pulled something from his jacket pocket, a photograph worn soft at the edges from frequent handling. He held it up with both small hands, offering it to Daniel like a sacred object. Daniel's hand trembled as he took it. The photograph showed him and Sarah together, sitting on the old couch in her apartment, the one with the spring that always poked through the cushion. They were younger in the picture, carefree in a way that felt like looking at strangers. Sarah's head rested on his shoulder, and he was laughing at something she'd said, his arm wrapped around her waist. He remembered that day with painful clarity. It was a Sunday morning, lazy and perfect, 2 months before everything fell apart. But he didn't remember anyone taking this photograph. He had never seen this picture before in his life. The boy in green had moved closer too, emboldened by his brother's courage. He looked up at Daniel with those two familiar eyes and said in a voice barely above a whisper that his name was Ethan. His brother, the one in navy, was Liam. They lived in the yellow house near the park, the one with the bird feeder in the front yard. Their aunt took care of them now, because their mommy was in heaven. The world tilted beneath Daniel's feet. He sat down heavily on a nearby bench, the photograph still clutched in his hand, his other hand pressed against his chest where his heart hammered so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. The boys followed him, standing close enough that he could smell the strawberry scent of children's shampoo in their hair. Liam, the braver one, explained in that matter-of-fact way children have that they had been coming to the cemetery with their Aunt Rachel every Sunday. She was Sarah's older sister, the one Daniel had met only a handful of times during his relationship with Sarah, the one who had made it clear at Sarah's funeral that he was not welcome in their family's grief. Today, Liam said, they had run ahead while Aunt Rachel was talking to someone near the front gate. They had seen Daniel kneeling at their mother's grave, and Ethan had recognized him from the photographs they kept in a special box under their beds. Daniel tried to form words, tried to make sense of what he was hearing, but his brain couldn't process it fast enough. If these boys were Sarah's sons, if she had been pregnant when she died, then why hadn't anyone told him? Why had her family kept this secret? And more pressingly, how could she have been pregnant when they had been so careful, when they had both agreed they weren't ready for children? Unless, the thought struck him like cold water, unless the timing was different than he remembered. Unless in those final chaotic months of their relationship, when everything was falling apart, when they were fighting more than talking, something had happened that neither of them had known about. She could have found out after their last fight. She could have been on her way to tell him when the accident happened. Daniel's throat constricted. All those years of guilt, and he hadn't even known the full extent of what he'd lost. Not just Sarah, not just their future together, but these two small lives who had grown up without him, who had been taught to recognize his face from old photographs, who had come running to him in a cemetery, calling him by the name he'd never thought he'd hear. Ethan had grown quiet, his earlier boldness fading. He watched Daniel with an intensity that was unnerving in someone so young, as if he was trying to memorize every detail, every expression. Liam, meanwhile, had settled onto the bench beside Daniel, his small legs swinging well above the ground, not quite touching. He started talking again, filling the silence with the kind of observations only children make. He said Daniel looked taller in the pictures. He asked if Daniel remembered the necklace he'd given their mom, the silver one with the tiny star that she'd been wearing when she died, the one they kept in the special box with the photographs. He wanted to know if Daniel still lived in the same apartment, if he still drove the blue car, if he remembered the song their mom used to hum all the time. Each question was a knife wound. Daniel didn't have answers. He had moved 3 times since Sarah died, bought and sold 2 cars, and he couldn't remember Sarah ever humming a particular song. His memories of her had been colored by guilt for so long that the happy details had faded, replaced by the weight of his failures and the echo of their last argument. A woman's voice cut through the air, sharp with panic. Daniel looked up to see a figure hurrying down the path between the graves, her dark hair streaming behind her. Rachel. Even from a distance, he recognized Sarah's sister. Those 7 years had changed her just as they had changed him. She looked older, wearier, with lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. The boys jumped up immediately. Liam grabbed Ethan's hand, and they moved together in that synchronized way twins often do, positioning themselves slightly in front of Daniel, as if to shield him. Rachel's pace slowed when she saw him. Recognition flashed across her face, followed quickly by anger. then something more complicated that Daniel couldn't quite read. She stopped a few feet away, breathing hard from a rush. Her eyes moved from Daniel to the boys and back again, taking in the scene. The photograph still in Daniel's hand. The way the boys had instinctively moved to protect him. The grave marker behind them, Sarah's name carved in granite. Rachel's voice, when she spoke, was carefully controlled, but Daniel could hear the tremor beneath it. She told the boys they knew better than to run off, that she had been worried sick. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Liam started to protest, to explain about seeing Daniel, but Rachel held up a hand to stop him. She asked them to wait by the oak tree they had passed on the path, the big one with the swing. She needed to talk to Daniel alone. The boys hesitated. Ethan looked up at Daniel with an expression that made his chest ache, a wordless question about whether they would see him again. Daniel found himself nodding before he could think better of it, offering a reassurance he had no right to give. Liam tugged his brother's hand, and they walked slowly toward the oak tree, glancing back over their shoulders every few steps. Once they were out of earshot, Rachel's composure cracked. She folded her arms across her chest, a defensive posture, and looked everywhere but at Daniel. She asked him what he was doing here, why he had come back after all this time. Her tone suggested she wasn't asking out of curiosity but accusation, as if his presence was an intrusion, an unwelcome disruption to the careful life she had built in the wake of her sister's death. Daniel tried to explain, stumbling over his words. He had come to apologize, to finally say the things he should have said 7 years ago. He hadn't known about the boys. Nobody had told him. His voice rose slightly at the end, a question buried in the statement. Rachel's laugh was bitter and short. She asked if he really expected them to tell him. The man who had broken Sarah's heart, who had made her cry more nights than not in those final months, who had driven her to get in the car that rainy evening upset and distracted. Her words were cruel, but not untrue. Daniel had carried the same accusations against himself for years. But there was something else in Rachel's expression now, a flicker of conflict. She looked toward the oak tree where the boys waited, then back at Daniel. She seemed to be waging an internal battle, weighing options, considering consequences. Finally, she spoke again, her voice quieter now, almost resigned. She told him that Sarah had found out about the pregnancy 2 weeks before she died. She had been terrified, unsure how to tell Daniel, given how fractured things had become between them. Rachel had been with her when she took the test, had held her while she cried and tried to figure out what to do. Sarah had planned to tell Daniel despite everything, had been driving to his apartment that evening to talk to him when a truck ran a red light at an intersection and changed everything in an instant. The doctors had performed an emergency delivery, trying to save what they could. Sarah died on the operating table, but the twins survived. Premature, fragile, but fighters. They had spent their first 2 months in the hospital, while Rachel and her parents tried to piece together a plan for raising 2 infants none of them had expected. In the chaos and grief, telling Daniel had seemed, to them at least, unnecessary. He had made it clear he didn't want the responsibility of a family. Why burden him with children he never wanted? Daniel felt sick. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the words dried up in his throat. She was right. He had said those things, maybe not in those exact words, but the sentiment had been clear. He had been 24 and ambitious, terrified of anything that might anchor him down or divert him from his goals. He had loved Sarah, or thought he had, but not enough to choose her over his dreams of success. Rachel continued speaking, her story spilling out now as if a dam had broken. The boys had been raised by her and her parents, who had passed away 2 years ago within months of each other. Now it was just Rachel, working 2 jobs to keep them in a decent school, to put food on the table, to give them the stability Sarah would have wanted. She had shown them photographs of their mother, told them stories, tried to keep Sarah's memory alive. And yes, she had shown them pictures of Daniel too, because the boys had asked about their father and she couldn't bring herself to lie. She hadn't expected them to recognize him. She hadn't thought they would run up to him in a cemetery, calling him Dad, as if 7 years of absence meant nothing. But children, Rachel said with a sad smile, had a way of simplifying complicated situations. They saw a face from a photograph and made a connection. They didn't understand abandonment or complicated history or the reasons adults kept secrets. Daniel asked if he could see them again, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. He didn't know what he was asking for exactly, didn't have a plan or even a clear sense of what role he could play in their lives. He just knew that walking away now, after seeing their faces and hearing them call him Dad, felt impossible. Rachel studied him for a long moment. Her expression was guarded, protective, the look of someone who had been let down too many times to trust easily. She asked what he wanted really. Was this guilt talking? A momentary impulse that would fade once he returned to his comfortable life? Because those boys had been through enough. They didn't need someone else who would disappoint them. The question hung between them, heavy and fair. Daniel didn't have a good answer. He couldn't promise consistency when he didn't know himself if he was capable of it. He couldn't guarantee he wouldn't mess this up when his track record suggested otherwise. All he could offer was honesty, the admission that he didn't know what he was doing, but that meeting those boys had shifted something fundamental inside him, had opened a door he hadn't known was there. Rachel sighed, the fight going out of her. She pulled a phone from her pocket and asked for his number, though her tone suggested she wasn't sure this was the right decision. She said she would think about it, would talk to the boys, would see if maybe, possibly, they could arrange something supervised. But she made it clear this was conditional, that she was the gatekeeper to their lives, and if he did anything to hurt them, she would cut him off without hesitation. Daniel gave her his number, watching as she saved it in her contacts. Then Rachel called the boys over. They came running, faces hopeful and open in that way children's faces are before life teaches them to guard their expressions. Rachel told them it was time to go, that they needed to finish their visit to Mommy's grave and then head home. Liam looked up at Daniel. His small hand reached out and grabbed Daniel's larger one without hesitation, without fear. Ethan was more cautious, hanging back slightly, but his eyes never left Daniel's face. Liam asked if Daniel would come visit them, if he would come to their house and see their room and the drawings they had made. He said they could show him the box of pictures, that he could tell them stories about their mom that they didn't know yet. Daniel looked at Rachel, asking permission with his eyes. She gave the smallest nod, a cautious allowance. Daniel crouched down to the boys' level and promised he would try, that if their aunt said it was okay, he would very much like to visit them. He didn't make grand promises about being there forever or stepping into a father role he didn't know how to fill. He simply told them he was glad he met them, that they seemed like remarkable kids, and that their mother would have been so proud of them. Ethan stepped forward then, closing the distance between them. He didn't say anything, but he hugged Daniel quickly, fiercely, before stepping back and grabbing his brother's hand. The gesture was so sudden and so genuine that Daniel felt something crack in his chest, some wall he had built around his grief and guilt and fear. Rachel herded the boys towards Sarah's grave, and Daniel watched as they knelt on the grass where he had been kneeling just an hour before. They placed small flowers they must have picked along the path, and Liam talked to the headstone in an animated voice while Ethan sat quietly, one hand touching the cold granite. It was such a normal scene, so practiced, that Daniel realized this was their ritual, something they did every week, paying respects to a mother they barely remembered but had been taught to honor. Daniel stood there for a long time after they left, watching their figures recede down the path and eventually disappear through the cemetery gates. The photograph was still in his hand, the edges damp now from his sweating palm. He looked down at it again, at the young man he had been, at Sarah's smile, at the happiness captured in a single frozen moment. He had come here to apologize, to seek some kind of absolution from a woman who could no longer grant it. Instead, he had found something he never expected. 2 lives that were half his, 2 small people who carried Sarah's legacy forward, who had grown up in his absence, but who looked at him now with her eyes. The weight of it pressed down on his shoulders, not crushing but grounding, pulling him into a reality he couldn't escape even if he wanted to. Daniel finally turned away from the grave, his footsteps crunching on the gravel path. The cemetery that had seemed so somber and final when he arrived now felt different, charged with possibility and terror in equal measure. His car waited in the parking lot, unchanged, but he was not the same man who had parked it there. The drive here had been about the past, about confronting ghosts and seeking redemption. The drive back would be about the future, about deciding what kind of person he wanted to be, what kind of father he could become if given the chance. The afternoon light was fading as Daniel reached his car, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. He sat behind the wheel, but didn't start the engine immediately. His phone felt heavy in his pocket, waiting for a call or message that might never come. Rachel had taken his number, but that didn't mean she would use it. She had every reason to protect those boys from him, to decide that their lives were better off without the complication of a father who had never been there. Daniel thought about his own father, a man who had been physically present but emotionally absent, who had treated family like a burden rather than a gift. He had sworn he would be different if he ever had children, yet he had spent his 20s running from exactly that possibility. Now, confronted with the reality of two sons who existed despite his fear and avoidance, he faced a choice. He could retreat back into the comfortable life he had built, the one where success was measured in profit margins and quarterly reports, where relationships were kept at arm's length to avoid the risk of pain. Or he could step forward into uncertainty, into the messy, complicated reality of trying to build connections with children who had every reason to reject him. The phone buzzed in his pocket, startling him. Daniel pulled it out with shaking hands, but it was just an email notification from work, something about a client meeting he had missed. He had left the office mid-afternoon with vague excuses, driven by an impulse he couldn't explain to finally visit Sarah's grave after 7 years of avoidance. His assistant had sounded concerned when he left, noting that he seemed distracted, unlike his usual composed self. She had no idea. Nobody in his current life knew about Sarah, about the relationship that had ended in tragedy, about the guilt he carried like a stone in his chest. Daniel had rebuilt himself after her death, or thought he had. He had thrown himself into work with single-minded intensity, building the consulting firm from nothing into a respected company. He had dated occasionally, relationships that never went deeper than surface level, never risked the kind of vulnerability that had made losing Sarah so devastating. He had friends, or what passed for friends in his world, colleagues he played golf with and attended industry events alongside. But none of them really knew him. He had made sure of that. Now, sitting in a cemetery parking lot as shadows lengthened around him, Daniel realized how hollow his life had become. The success he had pursued so relentlessly felt empty when measured against the sight of two small boys placing flowers on their mother's grave, when weighed against the possibility of connection he had glimpsed in their eyes. He had spent 7 years running from the past, and in doing so, he had run from any chance at a meaningful future. The drive back to his apartment took him through parts of the city he usually avoided, neighborhoods where families gathered in small parks, where corner stores sold penny candy and bicycles leaned against porch railings. Daniel found himself slowing as he passed a playground where children climbed on equipment while parents watched from benches, calling out warnings about being careful, about waiting their turn on the slide. This was the world Ethan and Liam inhabited, so different from his own realm of office towers and expensive restaurants. The yellow house near the park. Rachel had mentioned it, or rather Liam had, describing where they lived with the casual certainty of childhood. Daniel wondered if he could find it, if he drove through the residential streets looking for a yellow house with a bird feeder. He immediately recognized the thought as inappropriate, stalkerish even. Rachel would call if she decided to let him into the boys' lives. He had to respect that, had to give her the space to make that choice without pressure. But as he drove, Daniel couldn't stop his eyes from scanning the houses he passed, looking for yellow paint and bird feeders, wondering which windows belonged to his son's bedroom, imagining the life that unfolded behind those walls without him. A life of homework and bedtime stories, of scraped knees and laughter, of all the small, ordinary moments that built childhood. 7 years of moments he had missed that he could never reclaim. His apartment, when he finally reached it, felt sterile and cold. Daniel had furnished it with expensive, minimalist pieces that looked impressive but offered no comfort. There were no photographs on the walls, except for a few abstract prints selected by an interior designer. No clutter, no toys, no signs that anyone really lived here rather than simply occupied the space between work commitments. He dropped his keys on the granite counter and stood in the middle of his living room, seeing it as if for the first time. This was what he had chosen over Sarah. This empty, elegant space, this successful, lonely life. He had told himself he was happy, that he valued his independence and freedom. But meeting Ethan and Liam had stripped away that comfortable delusion. He wasn't happy. He had been hiding, protecting himself from the possibility of loss by refusing to truly connect with anyone. Daniel pulled out his phone and looked at the blank screen, willing it to ring or buzz with a message. Nothing. He sat on the coffee table and tried to focus on other things. He should eat dinner, though he had no appetite. He should catch up on the work emails accumulating in his inbox, though the thought of reading another strategic planning document made him want to throw the phone across the room. Instead, he sat on his expensive, uncomfortable couch and stared at the wall, replaying the afternoon in his mind. The way Liam had grabbed his hand without hesitation, trusting and open. The way Ethan had studied him with those serious eyes before finally offering that brief, fierce hug. The photograph they carried with them, proof of a past Daniel had tried so hard to forget. Rachel's anger and pain, justified and raw, reminding him that his choices had rippled outward, affecting more lives than just his own. And Sarah's grave, the reality he had avoided for so long, finally confronted, but somehow less final now knowing that part of her lived on in those two boys. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed watching shadows move across the ceiling, his mind refusing to quiet. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Liam's hopeful face asking if he would come visit, saw Ethan's cautious smile, saw Rachel's protective stance, and the way she had looked at him like he was a threat rather than a help. He had never felt more unequal to a challenge, more uncertain of his ability to do the right thing. Morning came gray and drizzly, matching his mood. Daniel went through the motions of his routine, showering and dressing in one of his tailored suits, making coffee he didn't drink. He arrived at the office early, hoping work would provide distraction, but found he couldn't focus. His assistant knocked on his door mid-morning, concerned because he had missed 2 meetings and hadn't responded to urgent emails. Daniel assured her he was fine, just dealing with a personal matter, but he could see she didn't believe him. The week that followed was torture. Every time his phone rang, Daniel's heart jumped, hoping it was Rachel calling with permission to see the boys. But it was always work, always something that needed his attention but felt meaningless now. He found himself distracted in meetings, his mind drifting to thoughts of what Ethan and Liam might be doing at that moment. Were they at school? What subjects did they like? Did they play sports? What made them laugh? He realized he knew nothing about them except what he had gleaned in that brief cemetery encounter. He didn't know their favorite foods or their bedtimes, didn't know if they were good students or struggled in certain subjects, didn't know what they wanted to be when they grew up or what scared them in the dark. These basic details of their lives were mysteries to him, and the gap between his knowledge and his sudden fierce desire to know everything felt unbridgeable. On Friday evening, as Daniel was leaving the office, his phone finally rang with an unfamiliar number. His hand shook as he answered, barely managing to sound calm as he said hello. Rachel's voice came through the line, cautious and formal. She said she had talked with the boys, had consulted with a therapist who specialized in family transitions, had thought long and hard about whether this was the right thing to do. The boys wanted to see him, she said, and the therapist thought supervised visits might be appropriate if certain conditions were met. Daniel found himself agreeing to everything before she even finished speaking. Yes, he would meet them in public places with Rachel present. Yes, he understood this was not immediate custody or unsupervised access. Yes, he would go slowly, would let the boys set the pace, would not make promises he couldn't keep. Yes, he would attend counseling sessions if recommended. He would have agreed to anything in that moment. So desperate was he for the chance to see Ethan and Liam again. Rachel gave him an address for a park, not the one near their house, but a different one, neutral territory. Tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock. She would bring the boys, and they could spend an hour together while she watched from a nearby bench. If it went well, they could discuss future meetings. If not, she made clear this would be the last time. She was giving him one chance for the boys' sake because they had asked so earnestly and because denying them seemed cruel. But one chance was all he would get. Daniel thanked her, his voice thick with emotion he tried to hide. After hanging up, he stood in the parking garage beside his car, barely able to process that this was happening, that tomorrow he would see his sons again. The words still felt strange in his mind. His sons. Two small lives he had helped create, but had played no role in shaping, who somehow still wanted to know him despite his absence. The rest of Friday evening passed in a blur of anxious preparation. What if one were to meet their children for the first time? Really the first time in a setting that mattered. Daniel changed clothes 3 times, settling finally on jeans and a casual shirt, trying to look approachable rather than intimidating. He didn't want to show up looking like the corporate executive he was, all polished and distant. He wanted to look like someone a child could trust, could talk to, could maybe eventually see as a father. He barely slept again that night, his mind spinning through scenarios. What if the boys changed their minds when they saw him? What if he said the wrong thing, did something to disappoint or scare them? What if Rachel decided after 10 minutes that this had been a mistake? The fears multiplied in the darkness, each one more overwhelming than the last, until Daniel found himself sitting up in bed with his head in his hands, wondering if he was making a terrible mistake by agreeing to this meeting. But underneath the fear was something else, something that felt like hope stirring after a long hibernation. For 7 years, he had moved through life on autopilot, successful on the outside, but empty within. The encounter at Sarah's grave had cracked something open, had forced him to confront not just his past mistakes, but his present loneliness. Meeting Ethan and Liam had shown him a possibility he had never considered, a path forward that involved connection rather than isolation, risk rather than safety. Saturday morning arrived cold and bright. Daniel was at the park 30 minutes early, unable to sit still in his apartment any longer. He walked the perimeter, noting the playground equipment, the open grassy areas, the benches where Rachel would presumably station herself. Other families were already there, children running and shouting, parents pushing swings, or helping toddlers navigate the slide. Daniel felt like an outsider watching through glass, observing a world he had deliberately excluded himself from. At 2 o'clock exactly, Rachel's car pulled into the parking lot. Daniel's heart hammered so hard he felt dizzy. He watched as she got out, then opened the back door to help the boys from their car seats. They spotted him immediately, and Liam broke into a run across the grass, Ethan following more cautiously behind. Daniel crouched down as Liam barreled into him, small arms wrapping around his neck with complete trust. Ethan stopped a few feet away, watching the reunion with his serious, thoughtful expression. Daniel looked up at him and smiled, not pushing, just offering welcome. Slowly, Ethan stepped forward and accepted Daniel's outstretched hand. His grip was small but firm, a tiny warm palm against Daniel's larger one. In that moment, holding hands with both his sons, Daniel felt something shift permanently in his chest, some locked door swinging open to let in light. Rachel settled herself on a bench with a clear view of the playground, her posture rigid with watchfulness. Daniel could feel her eyes on them as he walked with the boys toward the swings, Liam's hand still firmly clasped in his, Ethan trailing a half-step behind. The weight of her scrutiny pressed down on him, a constant reminder that this fragile connection could shatter with one wrong move. Liam chattered continuously as they walked, pointing out the best swings, the tallest slide, the spinning platform that made him dizzy but that he loved anyway. His voice carried an easy confidence that both amazed and intimidated Daniel. This child who barely knew him spoke with such openness, such lack of guard, as if Daniel's 7-year absence meant nothing in the face of this present moment. Ethan remained quieter, his observations coming in small fragments. He mentioned the sandbox where they sometimes built castles, the bench where Aunt Rachel always sat, the tree where a squirrel lived and sometimes took peanuts from their hands. Daniel pushed them on the swings, one hand for each boy, trying to keep the rhythm steady. Liam wanted to go higher, always higher, shrieking with delight each time the swing reached its peak. Ethan preferred a gentler pace, his legs pumping in careful, measured movements, his face serious even in play. Daniel found himself studying them, noting the differences in their temperaments, the ways they approached even something as simple as swinging. He wondered if these differences had been there from birth or if they had developed over time, shaped by experiences he knew nothing about. After the swings, Liam wanted to show Daniel the climbing structure, an elaborate wooden fortress with multiple levels and slides. He scrambled up the ladder with the fearlessness of childhood, calling back for Daniel to follow. Daniel glanced toward Rachel, uncertain if he was allowed to follow the boys into their play or if he should maintain some distance. She gave a small nod, permission granted but closely monitored. The structure was designed for children, and Daniel felt absurdly large as he climbed through openings meant for smaller bodies. Liam led him to the highest platform, where you could see across the entire park. Ethan joined them more slowly, testing each handhold before committing his weight. From their vantage point, Daniel could see Rachel on her bench, phone in hand, but her attention never wavering from them. Other families moved through the park, ordinary Saturday afternoon scenes that suddenly felt extraordinary to Daniel because he was part one. Liam asked questions in the rapid-fire way children do, not waiting for complete answers before launching into the next query. He wanted to know where Daniel lived, what kind of car he drove, if he had any pets, what his favorite food was, if he liked soccer or baseball better. Each question was a small opening, an attempt to build a picture of this stranger who was somehow their father. Daniel answered honestly, though he felt the inadequacy of his responses. He lived in an apartment downtown, drove a sedan, had no pets, liked Italian food, and hadn't played organized sports in years. His life, when filtered through these simple questions, sounded colorless and empty. Ethan's questions, when they came, were different. You want to know if Daniel remembered their mom's birthday, if he knew what kind of flower she liked, if he had been there when they were born. These questions cut deeper, exposing the gaps in Daniel's knowledge and presence. He admitted he remembered Sarah's birthday, that she had loved sunflowers, that he hadn't known about the pregnancy, and so hadn't been at their birth. Ethan absorbed these answers with his thoughtful expression, processing information that clearly mattered to him in ways Daniel couldn't fully understand. They played for nearly an hour, moving from the climbing structure to the sandbox to a game of tag that left all three of them breathless. Daniel couldn't remember the last time he had run like that, chasing after two small boys who squealed with laughter when he got close, who tagged him back with triumphant shouts. His lungs burned, and his dress shoes, wrong for park activities, rubbed blisters on his heels, but he didn't care. For that hour, nothing existed except this moment, these boys, this unexpected gift of time together. When Rachel finally called them over, signaling the end of their allotted time, Daniel felt a physical ache at the thought of saying goodbye. Liam protested, asking for 5 more minutes, then 2 more minutes, then just 1 more trip down the slide. Rachel remained firm but not unkind, reminding him they had discussed this, that they would see Daniel again if everything went well. The conditional nature of that promise hung in the air. Daniel walked back to Rachel's bench with the boys, acutely aware that this could be the last time if she decided he had failed some invisible test. Liam grabbed his hand again, swinging their joined arms between them. Ethan reached for his other hand, a gesture that felt monumental given his earlier caution. They stood that way for a moment, connected, and Daniel wished he could freeze time, hold on to this feeling before reality intruded again. Rachel studied them, her expression unreadable. She asked the boys to wait by the car for a moment while she talked to Daniel. They went reluctantly, glancing back every few steps, and Daniel felt their absence like a physical loss. Once they were out of earshot, Rachel turned to him with that same measured assessment she had worn at the cemetery. She said the boys had enjoyed themselves, that was obvious, but she needed to be clear about expectations moving forward. This wasn't about his convenience or his guilt. If he wanted to be part of their lives, it would require consistency reliability, showing up even when it was inconvenient or uncomfortable. The boys had already lost their mother. She would not let them lose another parent figure because someone couldn't commit to being present. Daniel met her eyes and promised he understood, that he wanted this not out of guilt, but because meeting Ethan and Liam had changed something fundamental in him. He knew it sounded inadequate, knew his track record suggested otherwise, but he meant it with every fiber of his being. Rachel watched him for a long moment, then gave a short nod. They could try another visit next weekend. Same park, same time. If he kept showing up, if he proved himself trustworthy, they could gradually build towards something more regular. Daniel thanked her, his voice rough with emotion he didn't try to hide. As he walked back to his car, the boys waved from Rachel's vehicle, their faces pressed against the window. He waved back, already counting the days until next Saturday, already planning how he would rearrange his schedule to make this work. The drive home felt different than the drive there. The fear was still present, but now it was mixed with something else. Purpose, perhaps, or the first fragile shoots of hope taking root in ground that had been barren for too long. The following week tested Daniel's resolve in ways he hadn't anticipated. His work, which had always consumed him so completely, now felt like an obstacle to what really mattered. He found himself distracted in meetings, checking his phone compulsively even though Rachel had made clear she would only contact him about scheduled visits. His colleagues noticed the change. His business partner, Marcus, cornered him after a particularly unfocused presentation and asked if everything was okay. Daniel hesitated, then told him an abbreviated version of the truth. He had recently discovered he had children, twin boys he hadn't known about, and he was trying to figure out how to be part of their lives. Marcus's response was immediate concern mixed with curiosity. He asked questions Daniel didn't know how to answer. How old were they? Where had they been? Why was he only finding out now? Each question required Daniel to reveal more about his past, about Sarah, about the choices that had led to this complicated present. For years, Daniel had kept his personal life separate from work, maintaining careful boundaries between his professional persona and his private self. Now those boundaries felt arbitrary and exhausting. He found himself talking about Ethan and Liam to Marcus, describing their different personalities, the way Liam's laughter filled the air, how Ethan's serious observations revealed a depth of thought remarkable in someone so young. Marcus listened with genuine interest, then offered advice from his own experience as a father. Be patient, he said. Kids forgive more than adults do. Show up consistently, and they'll learn to trust you. The second Saturday visit went more smoothly than the first, some of the initial awkwardness dissolving as the boys grew more comfortable with Daniel's presence. They brought him drawings they had made during the week, elaborate crayon creations that depicted a man they labeled as Dad playing with two boys. Daniel felt his throat tighten looking at these images, at the hopeful future they represented. He carefully rolled the papers and promised to hang them in his apartment, a promise he kept that evening, taping them to his refrigerator where they looked absurdly cheerful against the stainless steel. Rachel remained watchful but slightly less tense during this second visit. She asked Daniel about his work, where he had grown up, what his family situation was like. Her questions felt like an interview, an assessment of whether he was stable enough, responsible enough, to be trusted with her nephews. Daniel answered honestly, talking about his estranged relationship with his own father, his mother who had passed away when he was in college, the way he had thrown himself into building his business partly to avoid dealing with those losses. Something in his honesty seemed to satisfy her. As they were leaving, Rachel mentioned that the boys had been asking if Daniel could come to their house sometime, if he could see their room and the box of pictures they kept. She hadn't agreed to anything yet, she made clear, but she was considering it. The possibility dangled before Daniel like a lifeline, a sign that he might be passing her tests, earning his way into their world inch by careful inch. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Saturday afternoons at the park became sacred time that Daniel guarded fiercely against work obligations. He bought appropriate shoes, learned the boys' favorite games, started keeping granola bars in his pocket, because Liam always got hungry after running around. He learned that Ethan loved books about space and planets, that Liam wanted to be a firefighter when he grew up, that both of them were learning to ride bikes without training wheels and needed someone to run alongside them while they practiced. Rachel began to relax incrementally. She started bringing a book to their park visits, still keeping one eye on them, but allowing herself to be slightly less vigilant. She shared small details about the boys' routines, their struggles and triumphs at school, the funny things they said at bedtime. These glimpses into their daily lives felt precious to Daniel. Pieces of a puzzle he was slowly assembling to understand who these children were beyond their Saturday afternoon selves. One evening, nearly 2 months after their first meeting, Rachel called with a different kind of invitation. The boys were in a school play, a production of a story about woodland creatures where Liam had been cast as a rabbit and Ethan as an owl. They had been asking if Daniel could come watch. Rachel wanted to know if he was interested, but she warned him that her parents' friends would be there, people from Sarah's life who might not react well to his presence. He would need to sit separately, wouldn't be acknowledged as family. Could he handle that? Daniel agreed without hesitation. The school auditorium was packed on the night of the performance, filled with parents and grandparents armed with cameras and phones. Daniel sat in the back row as instructed, feeling conspicuously alone among the clusters of families. The play itself was charming chaos, children forgetting lines or speaking too softly, props falling over, costumes slightly askew. But when Liam hopped across the stage in his rabbit ears, delivering his single line with enthusiastic volume, and when Ethan spoke his part with careful precision, Daniel felt pride swell in his chest with an intensity that shocked him. After the performance, as families gathered in the hallway congratulating their children, Daniel hung back. He could see Ethan and Liam surrounded by people, Rachel helping them out of their costumes, other children and adults creating a barrier he couldn't cross. But then Liam spotted him. The boy's face lit up, and he broke away from the group, running toward Daniel with his rabbit ears still bouncing on his head. Ethan followed, more sedately but with clear purpose. They grabbed his hands and pulled him toward where Rachel stood, announcing loudly that their dad had come to watch them. The conversations around them faltered. Daniel's soft faces turned toward him, expressions ranging from curious to confused to openly hostile. An older woman he didn't recognize demanded to know who this person was. Liam answered before anyone else could, stating with simple pride that this was their dad and he had come to see them in the play. The moment stretched uncomfortably. Rachel stepped in, her voice carrying an authority that suggested this conversation would happen elsewhere, not here in front of the children. She thanked everyone for coming, helped the boys gather their things, and guided Daniel toward the exit with a firm hand on his arm. The boys chattered excitedly between them, oblivious to the tension crackling in the adult world above their heads. Outside in the parking lot, Rachel turned to him with a complicated expression. She said she hadn't expected them to react that way, hadn't anticipated them claiming him so publicly. It changed things, she admitted. Keeping his existence separate was becoming impossible when the boys talked about him constantly at home, when they drew pictures of him, when they introduced him as their dad to anyone who would listen. She had to decide whether to keep trying to contain this or acknowledge it openly. Daniel waited, barely breathing, for her to continue. Rachel looked at her nephews, who were showing each other their certificates of participation, then back at Daniel. She said she wanted to try something different. Sunday dinners at their house, weekly, with him present. It would let the boys see him in their home environment, let him understand their actual daily lives rather than just park visits. It would also force her to accept his presence in a more integrated way. But there would be ground rules, she emphasized. He would come as a guest, not as an authority figure. He would not undermine her parenting or confuse his role with hers. He would leave if asked, no questions or arguments. Could he accept those terms? Daniel agreed to everything, his heart pounding so hard he felt dizzy. Sunday dinners meant seeing them weekly, being part of their routine, entering the space where they live their real lives. It was more than he had dared hope for. Rachel gave him their address, the yellow house near the park that Liam had mentioned months ago at the cemetery, and told him to arrive at 5 the following Sunday. Nothing fancy, she said, just dinner and time together. The days until Sunday crawled by. Daniel found himself nervous in a way he hadn't been since his first major business presentation. He agonized over what to bring, finally settling on flowers for Rachel and a book about constellations for Ethan, a model fire truck for Liam. Small gestures that wouldn't overwhelm, but showed he had been paying attention to what mattered to them. The yellow house was exactly as he had imagined it during those early weeks when he wondered where his sons lived. Small, but well-maintained, with a bird feeder in the front yard, just as Liam had described. Daniel parked on the street and sat for a moment, gathering courage. This felt more significant than the park visits, crossing a threshold into their private world where Sarah's presence would be more palpable, where his absence would be more obvious. Liam answered the door before Daniel could knock, having apparently been watching for his arrival. He grabbed Daniel's hand and pulled him inside with excited narration about everything they would show him. The interior of the house was warm and lived in, nothing like Daniel's sterile apartment. Drawings covered the refrigerator, toys were scattered in organized chaos. Photographs lined the walls and shelves. Daniel's eyes caught on these photos, multiple images of Sarah that he had to force himself not to stare at. Ethan was more reserved in his welcome, but clearly pleased Daniel had come. He wanted to show Daniel his room first, pulling him down the hallway past the bathroom and what must have been Rachel's bedroom. The boys' room was small, with two twin beds pressed against opposite walls and shelves overflowing with books and toys. Ethan went immediately to a box under his bed and pulled out the collection of photographs they had mentioned. He spread them carefully on his bedspread, a gallery of Sarah's life that included many images Daniel had never seen. There was Sarah as a child, gap-toothed and grinning. Sarah as a teenager with unfortunate hair choices that made Daniel smile, despite himself. Sarah in her early 20s, around the time Daniel had met her, though these photos were from before his time. And then there were the pictures from their relationship, images he recognized and some he didn't. The one the boys had shown him at the cemetery was there, but so were others. Sarah laughing at something off camera, Daniel's arm around her shoulders. Both of them at what looked like a friend's wedding, dressed up and dancing. A selfie Sarah had taken of them lying in grass somewhere, faces close together and smiling. Ethan explained that Aunt Rachel had given them this box when they were old enough to understand about their mother. They could look at it whenever they wanted, could ask questions, could keep it safe. Liam added that they looked at it most nights before bed, picking a photo and asking Rachel to tell them the story behind it. It was how they had learned who their mother was, how they kept her alive in their minds and hearts. Daniel felt emotion clog his throat. These boys had been raised with such care, such intentional connection to the mother they had lost. Rachel had given them something precious, a way to know Sarah despite her absence. He asked if they had questions about the pictures, about their mother, about that time in her life. Ethan immediately asked what Sarah's laugh sounded like, if Daniel could describe it. Liam wanted to know her favorite song, the one she hummed that he had asked about before. Daniel closed his eyes, reaching back through years of deliberate forgetting to retrieve these details. Sarah's laugh had been infectious, starting as a low chuckle that built into something brighter, often ending in a snort she pretended to be embarrassed about. Her favorite song, he suddenly remembered, had been an old folk tune her grandmother taught her, something about rivers and mountains. She hummed it when she was content, when she was cooking or reading or just existing in a moment of peace. The boys absorbed these details hungrily, as if Daniel's memories could somehow make their mother more real to them. Liam asked what game she liked to play, if she was good at sports, what made her angry. Ethan wanted to know deeper things, if she had been scared of anything, what she dreamed about, how she showed love. Daniel answered what he could, painting a picture of Sarah as he had known her, aware that his version was incomplete and colored by his own failures and regrets. Rachel appeared in the doorway, announcing that dinner was ready. Her expression as she watched Daniel with the boys and the photographs suggested she had been listening from the hallway, bearing witness to this exchange. She didn't comment on it, simply herded them toward the kitchen where a table was set for four. The normality of it struck Daniel, the simple domestic scene of plates and silverware and a casserole dish steaming in the center. Dinner conversation flowed, more easily than Daniel had expected. Liam dominated much of it with stories from school, elaborate tales about playground politics, and classroom drama that made even Rachel smile. Ethan contributed quieter observations, noting which subjects he found interesting, mentioning a science project about weather patterns he was working on. Rachel asked Daniel about his work in a way that invited him to translate business jargon into something the boys might understand. Daniel found himself explaining his consulting firm in simple terms, talking about how he helped other businesses solve problems and work more efficiently. Liam wanted to know if that meant he was like a superhero for companies, fixing things that were broken. The comparison made Daniel laugh, the first genuine, unguarded laugh he could remember in recent memory. Not quite a superhero, he said, but he did try to help when he could. After dinner, Rachel allowed the boys to watch a movie if they cleaned up their dishes first. They negotiated for Daniel to stay and watch with them, a negotiation Rachel permitted with the caveat that it was a school night and bedtime would be strictly enforced. They settled on the couch, Liam immediately claiming the spot next to Daniel, Ethan on his other side. The movie was animated, something about talking animals on an adventure, but Daniel barely paid attention to the screen. His awareness was consumed by the warm weight of two small bodies pressed against his sides, the casual way Liam's head drooped onto his shoulder as the movie progressed, how Ethan's breathing had evened out into something that might have been sleep. When the credits rolled, Rachel appeared and gently roused the boys. Time for pajamas and teeth brushing, she announced, immune to their protests. They shuffled off reluctantly, Liam turning back to ask if Daniel would come again next Sunday. Daniel looked to Rachel for permission before confirming that yes, if their aunt agreed, he would very much like to come back. Rachel walked him to the door while the boys got ready for bed. She said tonight had gone well, better than she expected. The boys had been asking about him all week, wondering what it would be like to have him in their house. She could see now that they felt comfortable with him, that his presence didn't disrupt their routine but somehow enhanced it. She was willing to continue these Sunday dinners, to see how this arrangement developed. Daniel thanked her, inadequate words for the gift she was giving him. As he turned to leave, Ethan appeared in the hallway in his pajamas, holding something in his hands. He walked over shyly and handed it to Daniel. It was a drawing, clearly done earlier that day, showing a yellow house with 4 stick figures in front of it. Aunt Rachel stood to one side, easily identified by her height. 2 smaller figures held hands in the middle, labeled Liam and Ethan in careful letters. And on the other side, a taller figure labeled Dad, connected to the boys by a line that might have been arms reaching toward each other. Ethan said he wanted Daniel to have it, to hang wherever he hung things. Daniel crouched down to eye level with the boy and promised he would put it somewhere special, somewhere he could see it every day. Ethan nodded solemnly, satisfied, then hugged Daniel quickly before disappearing back down the hallway. Daniel left clutching the drawing like the treasure it was, his eyes stinging with tears he didn't try to hide from Rachel, who watched from the doorway with an expression that might have been approval or might have been hope or might have been both. The Sunday dinners became ritual. Daniel learned the rhythms of the household, the way Rachel maintained order through consistent routines and clear expectations. He saw how she navigated the challenges of raising 2 active boys while working full-time, how she balanced their individual needs, how she kept Sarah's memory present without letting grief overwhelm them. He developed profound respect for what she had built, the stability she provided, the love she showed even when exhausted. Daniel also began to notice the cracks, the places where Rachel's resources were stretched thin, the water heater that needed replacing but that she was putting off, the boys' outgrown shoes that she kept patching because new ones weren't in the budget yet, the way she sometimes looked bone-tired on Sunday evenings, worn down by the relentless demands of single parenthood and full-time work. He wanted to help, to offer financial support, but he was unsure how to do so without offending her pride or suggesting she couldn't manage on her own. The opportunity came unexpectedly one Sunday, when Liam mentioned that their field trip to the Science Museum had been canceled because not enough parents could take time off work to chaperone. Rachel confirmed this with obvious frustration, explaining that she had already requested the day off from both her jobs, a rare occurrence, but other parents had scheduling conflicts. The trip needed a minimum number of adult supervisors, and they had fallen short. Daniel offered before he fully thought it through. He could chaperone, could take the day off from work, could help make sure the trip happened. Rachel looked at him skeptically, asking if he understood what chaperoning meant. Keeping track of 6-year-olds in a crowded museum, managing bathroom breaks and snack time, being responsible for children's safety. Daniel admitted he had no experience with such things, but was willing to learn if it meant Liam and Ethan could go on their field trip. Rachel considered this for a long moment, then agreed with conditions. She would come too, would be there to support if things went wrong, but yes, he could be an official chaperone. The boys were ecstatic, jumping around the living room with excitement. Liam announced he would make sure his dad saw all the best exhibits. Ethan wanted to show him the planetarium show about stars and galaxies. The field trip day arrived with perfect weather, sunny, but not too hot. Daniel met the group at the school, feeling out of place among the parents who clearly knew each other well, who had established friendships through years of school events and playdates. Rachel introduced him simply as a family friend helping with supervision, not explaining his actual relationship to the boys. Daniel understood the discretion, though it stung slightly to be relegated to friend status rather than acknowledged as their father. He was assigned a group of 6 children, including Ethan, while Rachel took a group that included Liam. The morning was controlled chaos, herding excited first graders through museum exhibits about dinosaurs and ancient civilizations. Daniel found himself answering endless questions, tying shoelaces, mediating disputes about who got to press the interactive buttons. It was exhausting and strangely exhilarating, this glimpse into the world the boys inhabited when he wasn't around. Ethan stayed close to Daniel throughout the morning, occasionally taking his hand when the crowds got thick, pointing out exhibits he thought were particularly interesting. He explained facts about velociraptors and Egyptian mummies with the serious tone he brought to everything, clearly proud to show off his knowledge. When they reached the space exhibit, Ethan's carefully maintained composure cracked into genuine excitement. He pulled Daniel toward each display, reading the plaques aloud, asking questions that showed real understanding of complex concepts. During lunch in the museum cafeteria, the children in Daniel's group peppered him with questions about who he was and why he was there. One bold little girl asked if he was Ethan's dad because they looked alike. Before Daniel could figure out how to answer, Ethan said simply yes, this was his dad, and kept eating his sandwich as if the revelation was no big deal. The other children accepted this immediately, moving on to more pressing topics like who had the best snacks in their lunchboxes. But Daniel caught Rachel's eye across the cafeteria and saw her register what had happened. Ethan had claimed him publicly, had stated their relationship as fact to his peers. There would be no putting that particular genie back in the bottle. Rachel's expression was unreadable, but she gave a small nod that might have been acknowledgement or might have been approval. The afternoon planetarium show was the highlight for Ethan. They reclined in special seats while stars appeared on the domed ceiling above them, a narrator explaining constellations and planets and the vastness of space. Ethan whispered observations throughout, pointing out things he had learned from his books, correcting a minor error the narrator made about Saturn's rings. When a show talked about how light from distant stars takes years to reach Earth, meaning we're seeing the past when we look at the night sky, Ethan turned to Daniel and said that was like photographs. We see people how they were before, not how they are now. The simple profundity of that observation struck Daniel silent. Ethan was right. All those photos in the box under his bed showed Sarah, as she had been, frozen moments that couldn't capture who she might have become if she had lived. And in a way, Daniel had been frozen too, trapped in the past by guilt and avoidance, unable to move forward. Meeting these boys had unstuck him, had forced him into the present with all its messy, complicated possibilities. The bus ride back to school was quieter, children tired from the day's activities. Ethan dozed with his head against Daniel's arm, trust evident in his relaxed posture. Daniel watched him sleep and felt something fierce and protective surge through his chest, a feeling he was starting to recognize as paternal love. Not the abstract concept he had always feared and avoided, but specific and immediate, rooted in this particular child with his serious eyes and thoughtful questions and generous heart. At the school, parents arrived to collect their children. Daniel helped distribute backpacks and sweaters, made sure each child in his group found their designated adult. As the crowd thinned, Rachel approached with both boys, who were begging to go home with Daniel instead of her. They wanted to see his apartment, wanted to know where he lived, wanted their dad to put them to bed tonight. Rachel looked at Daniel, a question in her eyes. This was a test. He realized perhaps the most significant one yet. Was he ready for the responsibility of having them in his space, of managing bedtime routines and morning chaos, of being their primary caregiver, even temporarily? Daniel took a breath and said yes, if Rachel was comfortable with it. He would love to have them for the evening. He would bring them home before school tomorrow morning. Rachel agreed with one condition. She would come over to Daniel's apartment first, would see where they would be staying, would satisfy herself that the space was appropriate. Daniel gave her his address, and they caravanned to his building, the boys vibrating with excitement in Rachel's back seat. Daniel spent the drive mentally cataloging his apartment, suddenly seeing it through her eyes. The expensive but impersonal furniture, the lack of anything child-friendly, the sterile quality that had never bothered him before but now felt shameful. Rachel's assessment was swift and damning. She walked through the space, noting the glass coffee table at exactly head height for running children, the complete absence of food they would eat, the white furniture that would show every smudge and stain. She turned to Daniel with raised eyebrows and asked if he seriously thought this was appropriate for children. He admitted it wasn't, that he hadn't thought about child-proofing because kids had never been part of his life here. But he wanted to learn, wanted to make changes, wanted this to work. Rachel pulled out her phone and started a list. Corner guards for the coffee table and sharp furniture edges. Plastic dishes and cups. Kid-friendly snacks and simple breakfast foods. Night lights for the hallway and bathroom. At least one toy or book to occupy them. She sent him a list and said she would take the boys grocery shopping while he ordered the safety items for same-day delivery. They would return in 2 hours, giving him time to make the space minimally acceptable. Daniel moved faster than he ever had closing a business deal. He ordered everything on Rachel's list with rush delivery, then added items he thought might help. A soft throw blanket for the couch, where one of them could sleep. Pillows for building forts. Basic art supplies. A nightlight shaped like a rocket ship. He cleared space in his bedroom for the boys to sleep, pushing furniture aside to make room for the air mattress he ordered. He hid away anything fragile or dangerous, packed up his work laptop and papers, transformed his sterile bachelor pad into something resembling a space where children could exist safely. When Rachel returned with Ethan and Liam, she did another inspection with a critical eye. She tested the corner guards, checked the cabinet locks, examined the food he had spread on the counter for her approval. She gave him a sheet of paper with detailed instructions for their evening routine and emergency contacts, including poison control and the nearest urgent care. She told him to call if anything went wrong, if he felt overwhelmed, if the boys gave him any trouble. Then she left, and Daniel was alone with his sons for the first time without her watchful presence as backup. The evening was a learning experience marked by small disasters and unexpected joys. Daniel burned the pasta for their dinner, forgot that children need smaller portions, let them have dessert before finishing their vegetables. But he also made them laugh with terrible jokes, helped Ethan build an elaborate block tower, read them stories with different voices for each character. Bath time was chaotic, water ending up everywhere except where it should be. But they emerged clean and giggling. Pajamas required negotiation and compromise. Teeth brushing had to be supervised, and getting them both settled in his bedroom with the air mattress required 3 stories, 2 drinks of water, and a promise he would be right in the living room if they needed anything. Daniel sat on his couch in the sudden silence, exhausted in a way his demanding job never made him. But it was a good exhaustion, earned through care rather than ambition. He checked on the boys twice before attempting sleep himself, found them tangled together on the air mattress despite having started in separate spots, their faces peaceful in rest. Looking at them, Daniel felt something shift permanently in his understanding of what mattered. This, he thought, This is what life is supposed to be about. Not corner offices or profit margins, but these small, quiet moments of watching children sleep, of knowing they were safe and cared for, of being present for someone other than yourself. Morning came early with Liam bouncing on the air mattress, asking what was for breakfast. Daniel made pancakes from a mix Rachel had bought, slightly burned, but edible. The boys ate with enthusiasm, syrup ending up in their hair and on their shirts despite Daniel's best efforts. He got them dressed in the spare clothes Rachel had packed, though Ethan's shirt was on backward and Liam refused to wear matching socks. They were ready with 10 minutes to spare before Daniel needed to get them to Rachel's house for their ride to school. 6 months had passed since that first encounter at the cemetery, and Daniel's life had transformed in ways he could never have predicted. The apartment he once prided himself on for its minimalist sophistication now had a dedicated corner filled with toys, books scattered across the coffee table, and crayon drawings taped to every available surface. His calendar, once dominated by business meetings and networking dinners, now revolved around school pickups, soccer practices, and bedtime routines. Rachel stood in Daniel's kitchen, watching him pack school lunches with the careful attention he once reserved for contract negotiations. She had called this meeting, asking to talk while the boys were at school, and her serious tone suggested something significant was coming. Daniel finished cutting sandwiches into triangles, a detail Liam insisted made them taste better, before turning to face her fully. Rachel spoke plainly. She had been offered a promotion at her primary job, a position that would provide better income and health benefits for the boys. But it required relocating to another state, a move that would take Ethan and Liam away from everything they knew, including Daniel. She hadn't accepted yet because the decision affected more than just her. The boys had formed a real bond with their father, and she refused to sever that connection without exploring other options. Daniel felt his world tilt. The thought of losing the boys now, after finally understanding what it meant to be their father, was unbearable. But he also recognized Rachel's impossible position. She had carried the burden of raising them alone for years, had sacrificed her own opportunities to provide stability. He couldn't ask her to refuse this chance for advancement, not when it could improve their financial security. Rachel continued, her voice measured but tense. There was another possibility she had been considering, one that terrified her but that she felt obligated to present. Daniel had proven himself consistent over these months, had demonstrated genuine commitment to the boys' well-being. If he was willing, if he was truly ready for the responsibility, she would consider joint custody. The boys would live primarily with him during the week, with her taking weekends and school breaks until her situation stabilized in the new location. The proposal hung between them, massive in its implications. Daniel would become the primary caregiver, responsible for every aspect of their daily lives. Morning routines, homework help, doctor appointments, parent-teacher conferences, the endless small decisions that shaped childhood. It was everything he had once fled from, everything he had told Sarah he didn't want. Now, faced with the choice between stepping fully into fatherhood or losing his sons, there was no hesitation. He told Rachel yes, not out of guilt or obligation, but because these 6 months had taught him what truly mattered. Ethan's quiet observations about the world, Liam's infectious enthusiasm, the weight of their small hands in his, the privilege of being called Dad, these had become the center of his existence. His business still mattered, but it no longer consumed him. He had learned to delegate, to set boundaries, to prioritize the moments that couldn't be rescheduled or replaced. Rachel studied his face for signs of doubt or uncertainty. She needed to know he understood what he was agreeing to, that this wasn't a romantic notion that would crumble under the weight of reality. She asked if he was prepared for the hard days, the tantrums and homework battles, the times when the boys would test boundaries or express anger about circumstances beyond anyone's control. She needed him to be certain. Daniel met her eyes and spoke with quiet conviction. He wasn't naive about the challenges ahead. The past months had given him glimpses of the difficulties, the exhaustion, the moments when parenting felt overwhelming. But they had also shown him a kind of fulfillment he had never experienced in any boardroom or business success. He wanted this, not because it would be easy, but because it was right. The conversation that followed covered practical logistics. They would need to formalize custody arrangements legally, establish clear guidelines for communication and decision-making, ensure the transition was as smooth as possible for Ethan and Liam. Rachel would delay her relocation by 2 months to help Daniel establish routines, to be available as the boys adjusted to their new primary residence. They discussed schools, medical care, financial responsibilities, all the intricate details of co-parenting between two people learning as they went. When they told the boys that evening, the reactions were predictably mixed. Liam was excited about living with Daniel, already planning how to arrange his things in the bedroom Daniel would convert for them. Ethan was quieter, processing the information that Aunt Rachel would be moving away, that their life was changing again. He asked careful questions about whether they would still see Rachel, whether they could call her whenever they wanted, whether this meant they were losing another person they loved. Rachel pulled Ethan close and promised him this was different. She wasn't disappearing. She would visit every few weeks, they could video call daily, and they would spend holidays and summers together. She was choosing to give them this opportunity to know their father fully, to have the family connection they deserved. Daniel added that nothing would happen without their input, that they could help decide how to set up their new room, that this was about giving them more love and support, not less. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Daniel worked with a family therapist to understand child development and effective parenting strategies. He enrolled the boys in the school near his apartment, arranged after-school care for days when work ran late, created systems for tracking assignments and managing their schedules. Rachel helped him shop for bedroom furniture the boys picked out themselves, taught him the specific ways each child needed comfort when upset, shared the countless small details that made up their individual personalities. The first week as primary caregiver was chaos. Daniel forgot about early dismissal on Wednesday, arrived late to Liam's soccer practice, packed lunches that the boys declared inedible. He called Rachel in panic when Ethan spiked a fever, uncertain whether to rush to the emergency room or wait it out. He stayed up past midnight helping Liam finish a project they had both forgotten was due. He felt inadequate and overwhelmed, certain he was failing at every turn. But there were moments of grace, too. Ethan curling up next to him on the couch to read before bed, sharing observations about his book in that thoughtful way Daniel had come to treasure. Liam's spontaneous hugs and declarations of love, offered freely without expectation of anything in return. The quiet satisfaction of successfully navigating bedtime routines, of packing lunches they actually ate, of showing up when and where he was needed. One evening, 3 weeks into their new arrangement, Daniel found himself at Sarah's grave for the first time since that fateful afternoon. The boys were with Rachel for the weekend, giving him a rare moment of solitude. He knelt on the familiar grass and finally spoke the words he had come to say months ago but had been interrupted from delivering. He told Sarah about their sons, about Ethan's curiosity and Liam's joy, about the incredible people they were becoming. He apologized for not being there when she needed him, for the harsh words that were his last communication with her, for all the ways he had failed their relationship. But he also thanked her, because choosing to keep the pregnancy despite his obvious inadequacy as a partner, because bringing Ethan and Liam into the world despite knowing she would raise them alone, Sarah had given him an unexpected gift, a chance at redemption, a purpose beyond himself, 2 small lives that had transformed his understanding of what mattered. Daniel wiped tears from his eyes and stood, feeling lighter than he had in years. The guilt would always be there, a reminder of mistakes made and time lost. But it no longer defined him. He was building something new now, not to erase the past, but to honor it by being the father these boys deserved, the man Sarah had perhaps seen potential for even when he couldn't see it himself. Walking back to his car, Daniel pulled out his phone and looked at the photo that now served as his lock screen. Ethan and Liam at the park, arms around each other, faces bright with laughter. His sons, his purpose, his second chance at getting life right. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.